of Worship, your source for commentary and discussion on worship, theology, and culture. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones. Well, hello, and welcome to the Act of Worship podcast. This is Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones, and it is great to be here with you today, discussing matters related to worship, theology, and culture. And I am back after a break over Christmas. I hope that you have had a great Christmas, Thanksgiving break, whatever you had, holiday break. I hope you have had a great one. And so it is good to be back in the swing of things and back in a normal routine. I love holidays, but that's the one thing that gets me is it breaks my routine, and I'm very much a person of routine. And so when it breaks that, it drives me crazy. So here we are, back in the new year and discussing these matters. And so starting off this 2021 year, which, by the way, I hope is certainly better than 2020. Hopefully, we'll see. But I am starting off this year discussing a matter that has become important to me recently. Someone that I know, not someone I'm close to, but someone that I have a relationship with and have some communication with, I recently found out is Muslim. And so we've had some discussions about that, and it has made me want to dig into the Islam faith and look into it a little more as a Christian. And so over the past month or two, I've really been reading a lot and studying about Islam, and have had some eye-opening information, I think. And it's really caused me to not only see, at least be able to see an Islamic perspective, but also determine how I as a Christian can have discussions with this Muslim person in hopes that he will see the light of the gospel. And so I want to discuss the worldview of Islam, and really more than anything, I think looking into this matter has caused me to realize even further the contrast of worldviews between Islam and Christianity. And so that's what I want to discuss today. The contrast of worldviews between Islam and Christianity. And I think of all world religions, Christianity and Islam are probably two of the most prominent. They are derived from the same origins, but both faiths have diverged into manifold differences with respect to the worldviews. And the consequences of both Christianity's and Islam's worldviews are extensive in nearly every culture of the world. And those who don't understand these foundations, I think, of both faiths, might incorrectly claim the God of Christianity to be the same as Islam. Maybe you have heard that, well, Allah and God, the Christian God, is the same God. I have heard that from numerous people. And when you hear people say that, you realize they understand nothing about one or the other or both. And so contrasting Christianity and Islam reveals a different truth, that this is not the same God. The God of Christianity and the God of Islam is not in any way, shape, or form the same God. And Christians need to understand the Islamic worldview through a threefold lens, and I'm going to cover that today. And that is, number one, the Islamic doctrine of Tawheed. Number two, the Islamic view of sin and its remedy. And number three, the Islamic perspective on the person and nature of Jesus Christ. These three things separate Islam. There are a lot of things that separate Islam from Christianity, but these things fundamentally, more than anything else, separate Islam and Christianity. And I think they create an irreconcilable contrast between these two faiths, okay? I'm not saying that Muslims and Christians cannot coexist and live together. I'm saying that the faiths can never be reconciled. And both think they are right. Well, one is right and one is wrong. You can't both be right. When you realize the contrast between these two, you can't be someone who says, well, but maybe Islam and Christianity can both be right. No. When you realize the contrast between the two, one has to be wrong. And so with this understandings, with these understandings, we can replace false assumptions about Islam with enlightenment and greater love for image bearers. Muslim people are image bearers created in the image of God, okay? That does not mean they are believers, that they are Christians, or that they have the right worldview, but they are image bearers, and so we need to treat them as such. So let's discuss these matters. Number one, the Islamic worldview, Tawheed. This is vastly different from the Christian worldview. The Islamic worldview is founded upon the doctrine of Tawheed. It's the Arabic term meaning oneness of God. And for this reason, polytheism is never accepted in Islam. Well, it's not in Christianity either. But while a monotheistic view is also taken by Christians, the doctrine of Tawheed infers that the Christian triune God is not possible because God is one alone. And to the Muslim, there is only Allah. In the Islamic view, Allah has no physical attributes. So the Christian concept of imago Dei that I just mentioned earlier, the image of God, image bearers, that humankind is created in the image of God, that is an impossible feature for Islam. And so while Christians believe in a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ, in the Islamic view, God cannot maintain a personal relationship with humans, but depends on his creatures to earn his respect in order to receive compassion. So this is a drastic contrast between Christianity and Islam, and it makes it impossible for the two faiths to reconcile. The doctrine of Tawheed does not allow for the Islamic faith to understand Jesus Christ as divine. No human can be divine. So although Islam understands Jesus to be valuable and an important prophet, okay, hear me on that. There's a lot of people that don't understand that in Islam, Jesus Christ exists. He is in the Quran, okay? They believe he's an important prophet, even believe in the virgin birth, okay? So the person of Jesus in Christianity stands in stark contrast to that of Islam. Even though Jesus is important to Muslims, he was a very important person, he is not divine. He is not God. That is not possible. In fact, in a period of serious discussions about the nature of Jesus, the Quran denounced all disputation about the nature of Jesus as vain. That is even in the Quran. So discussion about whether or not he's divine is vain. It's stupid to the Muslim. And in the Islamic view, Jesus is a Messiah, but not the Messiah. Okay, so there is a stark contrast there. In Christianity, he is certainly the Messiah. And such a view by Muslims radically impacts one's outlook on God, humankind, and the means of salvation. And because of the Islamic worldview, in other words, namely a view that you must earn Allah's compassion by pleasing him, devout Muslims find themselves persistently striving to walk the right path that's given by Allah. This is the concept of jihad, okay? From the term's earliest references, jihad should not be primarily understood as a holy war, but as striving to do the will of Allah. We often understand jihad as a holy war. As I've read about this recently, it has struck me that is not the original meaning of the term jihad. Okay, it has become distorted to mean that. The concept of a holy war emerged later because of this term's distortion. And so understanding the Islamic worldview consists of understanding jihad correctly. In its simplest terms, jihad is a Muslim's best efforts to walk the right path of Allah. In its most extreme form, jihad has become associated with terrorism, although the term does not inherently imply such. Contemporary Arab interpretations of Quranic texts take the form of animosity toward Jews, Christians, and all who do not follow the ways of Allah, which assuredly, I think, contributes to the widespread increase of global terrorism. But where the Christian worldview tends to offer grace and mercy, even to those who are opposed to the faith, Islamic worldview, by contemporary interpretations, seeks to destroy anyone who opposes the will of Allah. So even the demeanors of Allah and the Christian triune God stand countered to one another. Additionally, Islamic worldview and the concept of jihad expects women to endure sufferings and live under the authority of men in solidarity with the community of believers. While both women and Muslims are not a monolithic group, the belief in the inferiority of women to men is ubiquitous within contemporary devout Muslims. And so Christianity views women as equal to men. Even Paul's instructions for wives to submit to their husbands are written in the context of all believers submitting to one another. The Christian worldview does not see women as inferior to men, but rather as complementing to men, while both submit to one another under the ultimate authority of God. And ultimately, Christians submit to God, and so everything is derived from that. The Islamic worldview approaches women as inferior to men and to merely serve the purpose of procreation. That is the purpose of women in Islam. And so you could see just the drastic contrast between Islam and Christianity. And so severely dissimilar to the Christian worldview, the Islamic worldview is derived from the doctrine of Tawheed. Everything a devout Muslim believes and practices stems from the concept of Allah's oneness and separation from humankind. Even the concept of Jesus is impacted in such a worldview because Allah cannot be associated with any human and is in fact incapable of personal relationships with humankind. Humankind, however, according to Islamic worldview, needs to strive and walk in the right path of Allah to achieve compassion from Him. And these vital components of Islam provide a complete worldview that, although possessing some similarities to Christianity, at least in its foundation, operates in polar opposition to Christianity. And what I mean by its foundation is similar, I mean the origins of Islam. There are the same origins, but they have diverted from one another in such a stark contrast that they cannot be reconciled. And so the doctrine of Tawheed is one of the primary differences. The second one I want to talk about is the Islamic and Christian views of sin. Most world religions hold some view of morality. David Marshall writes this: in contrast to the moralistic, trivializing, hedonistic, or therapeutic transformations of what was formerly understood as sin, all world religions, if they are in one way or another religions of salvation or redemption, persistently maintain a dissonance between what we are and what we are meant to be, a contradiction between the factual state of humans and their true destiny. So both Christians and Muslims have views of sins which are manifold in many respects. Whereas sin is vital to Christianity, it is merely marginal in Islam. Sin, in fact, takes a plurality of meanings in the Islamic view, which ambiguates the topic a little bit. To Christians, humanity is inherently evil, with each person falling short of God's standards by nature. That's the book of Romans right there. Many Christians and Christian groups subscribe to the concept of original sin. I am one of those. And some go as far as even suggesting determinism, and I am one of those as well. To Muslims, however, humanity is less than Allah, but also capable of good. Both religions then hold distinct views of sin, Christianity centralizing and Islam minimizing its concept. But since sin is a reality in both Islam and Christianity, each has to offer a solution for redemption. In Christianity, the remedy for sin is Jesus Christ. We know that. As the Messiah and God Himself, Jesus alone offers total atonement for the sin of anyone who receives Him, a concept which would be considered blasphemous in the Islamic perspective. Islam asserts that atonement must be made between man and Allah directly rather than through a mediator. Additionally, It is up to each man to execute the will of Allah so that he might be atoned. In other words, man is directly accountable to Allah. Initially, the latter part of the concept is similar to many Christian perspectives. Even most determinists would not argue against the compatibility of human responsibility. But the Islamic perspective, does not require a mediator, while Christ the Messiah is an absolute necessity in Christianity. God, in Islam, God cannot humble himself to die on the cross for the sin of mankind, as did the Son Jesus. God is majestic and glorious, unlike the image of man. Man is very humble and small beneath the Most High. It would violate the divine attributes of God to have his Son die for the sin of mankind on the cross. That would be the Islamic perspective. The only possibility of atonement for Muslims, therefore, is to achieve a level of compassion from him, from Allah, by accomplishing his will and carrying out his tasks. So you have to accomplish the will of Allah. You have to carry out the will of Allah. In this manner, Islam is heavily works-based. And devout Muslims will perpetually strive for the satisfaction of Allah. And while Christianity emphasizes the importance of understanding sin and its consequences, Islam minimizes it. Both faiths demand a cure for sin, but the feat is accomplished in vastly disparate ways. For Christian believers, according to Scripture, Jesus Christ is the mediator between the Father and humankind, and is yet God himself in the flesh. No such mediating atoner is required for Islam, but only pleasing Allah to the point of receiving his compassion. The Islamic worldview, therefore, approaches the will of Allah in a serious manner, with the realization that if one does not execute Allah's tasks, he is certainly doomed. Christianity, however, relies on the righteousness of Christ. Therefore, the ransom has already been paid, irrespective of one's works. So the Islamic worldview often leads to radical measures in accomplishing the will of Allah. For a Christian to employ such drastic measures, there has to be a grave misunderstanding of God's grace through Jesus Christ. With such contrasting views of sin, both Islam and Christianity really hold opposing views of the remedy. And so number 3, the third contrast I want to discuss is the person and nature of Jesus in Islam and Christianity. This is probably, I would say, the biggest and most fundamental difference. As I mentioned earlier, Islam does not allow for a triune God. That is not possible because of the doctrine of Tawheed. This is probably the most significant view, though, the view of Jesus Christ. While Jesus is understood as the Son of God and, in fact, incarnate God himself in Christianity, it is blasphemy to refer to Jesus as divine in Islam. The Quran 5:17 and 572, for example, discuss blaspheming Allah by discussing Jesus as divine. Jesus is referenced in Islam and considered an important figure, but no more important than other prophets in the faith. Islam even acknowledges the virgin birth, but denies perhaps the most important aspects of the life of Christ, his death and resurrection. And Islam supports Jesus as a messenger from God to Israel, and even a Messiah, albeit not the Messiah. And so there are some, they don't dismiss Jesus. They think he is important. But he is not divine as Christians would consider him. Traditional Muslim interpretation of the Quran suggests that Jesus was not crucified on the cross, but that God raised him to himself. That's in Quran 4:158. God raised Jesus to himself. In other words, he just took him up to heaven. The Christian version of the ascension then occurs after the death and resurrection of Christ, while the Islamic version does not include Jesus' death. So there is a new, in the past couple of 100 years, there's a man named Ahmed Deedat, and he suggests that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but only fainted and then he awoke. And this is a view that is not common, but it's discounted by many Muslims, but it is a view that is out there, okay? But most Muslims would say that God took him up to heaven. And the greatest disagreement between Islam and Christianity regarding the nature of Jesus centers around his divinity. The Islamic doctrine of Tawhid does not allow for God to either have the form of a human or have a personal relationship with people. Or really to be divine in any sense of the word. Christianity is Christocentric. It revolves around Jesus as God in the flesh. And therefore, to reconcile by adopting Islamic doctrine is an impossibility for Christianity. And so, to understand the vital differences between Islam and Christianity, we have to realize the point of separation, which is no more crucial than that of the person and nature of Jesus. You can not claim Christianity and deny the death, resurrection, and divinity of Jesus. I have heard of people who have tried to do that. I have heard of people who have claimed to be Christians, but deny, and there's one prominent person that he's already passed away, but one that I am thinking of that many people hold in high respect, that denied, or at least questioned, the death, resurrection, and divinity of Jesus. You cannot do that. That is essential to being a Christian. Contrarily, someone cannot claim Islam and admit these 3 points of contention. With no bipolarity, Jesus is mysteriously both human and God. And I've heard people say that he is fully God and fully human, but fully implies some sort of quantity. But Jesus is God and human by nature, not by quantity. So it is more accurate to say that Jesus is truly God and truly human. That's an R.C. Sproul thought right there. And so this is the essence of Christianity, and it's blasphemous to the Islamic perspective. So there's an irreconcilable discord here. Realizing the foundational issues of Islam and the Islamic worldview exposes the fact that an irreconcilable discord subsists between Islam and Christianity. And this statement that I'm saying here doesn't negate the responsibility of Christians to love everyone, including Muslims. Certainly, there are commonalities between Christianity and Islam, but the fundamental doctrines of Islam perpetuate a worldview that is not only inconsistent with Christianity, but may never be reconciled. And through the Islamic doctrine of Tawhid, the concept of sin and its remedy, and the perception of Jesus Christ, a worldview is created that stands opposed to Christianity. So the Christian's response should be greater love toward a people who misunderstand truth and who deny the gospel that exists to save them. And so the Christian worldview includes love toward everyone, which is the place of origin for resolving significant differences between these two faiths. And so as I've been looking into this, it has given me a greater understanding perhaps of Islamic perspective, but also a way to discuss the gospel with people who need Jesus and who come from an Islamic perspective. And I hope this has been beneficial to you and can help you maybe in witnessing to people who you know that are Muslim. They need Jesus just as much as anyone. So let us be people of the gospel, of the faith that Christ uses as a catalyst to draw people to him. I hope you have enjoyed this and this has been beneficial. So thank you for listening today to the Act of Worship podcast. This is Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones.